Proverbially three-wheeling our way back into your internet browser. This is the latest episode of the Combat Press Midweek Report. It is Tuesday, December 9th, 2014. I'm your host, Eric Reinert, broadcasting, as always, from the home studio. We got a lot to talk about, but first, as always, a number of shout-outs. We got to shout out combatpress.com, the great website that keeps this show broadcasting for some reason. I don't think we get very many viewers. And I don't know how much traffic we actually provide to the site, but nevertheless, we're not going to look a gift horse in the mouth. We are doing this pro bono, as it were. So I guess that's probably the reason, because that's about what this show is worth. Again, go to combatpress.com for all the latest news, interviews, and opinions in the world of mixed martial arts. You can follow Combat Press on Twitter at Combat Press. Go to Facebook, give the Combat Press page a like, and get all the latest from the website in your Twitter feed. As always, well, is usually the case anyway. There was one time where I wasn't, but most of the time, and tonight is no exception, I am joined by Riley Cobra Kontek, the master of women's MMA rankings for CombatPress.com, and just an all-around really knowledgeable source on the sport. Riley, how are you this evening?
Man, doing good. Just trying to get through the work week here.
You and me both, buddy. Tonight, though, we'll take a little respite from our day jobs, talk about UFC 181. Which took place last Saturday. We'll also talk about Invicta FC 10, which took place last Friday, and a couple of other fights from around the world of mixed martial arts from the past weekend. We've got a few events coming up this weekend that we're going to talk about, including the finale of the 20th season of The Ultimate Fighter. A champion will be crowned, and indeed, a champion will be crowned unless there's a draw on Friday night. And then on Saturday night, we've got probably the best card to come to us on free television in quite some time, perhaps ever. UFC on Fox 13. This is one that, we'll obviously talk about a handful of the fights on the main card, but if you want your friends to, if any of your friends are even a little bit curious about MMA, this is the card to draw them to for all the right reasons, and we'll talk about all those reasons later on in the program. As well as a couple of fights from, again, outside the octagon in the World Series of Fighting. Their 15th card is also this Saturday, featuring a couple of title fights that we'll talk about. We've got one, I'd say, fairly significant, noteworthy news item to talk about. Most of you probably already know what I'm talking about, but we'll get there when we get there. We'll have a rapid-fire segment as usual, and then talk a wrestling minute. Again, go to combatpress.com for all the greatest content in the world of mixed martial arts. Riley, let's get it going. UFC 181, quite enjoyable. I had to DVR the last couple of fights because unfortunately I had to do a little bit of work at about 11:30 Central Time that night. So I missed the last two, had to DVR them, and actually had to rewatch the main event because I fell asleep during it. Not that that was a bad fight. It just it really said more to my state of mind at the time. But let's talk about that main event. I don't want to say it's a controversial decision because most people seem to think, okay, yeah, it could have gone either way, I suppose, but Robbie Lawler defeats Johnny Hendricks by split decision. Two judges scored the fight for Lawler. One scored it 49-46, another scored it 48-47, while the third judge scored it 47-48 in favor of Johnny Hendricks. Riley, my first question to you, how did you score this fight?
I had it 4-1, although it could have had it been 3-2 as well. I did think Robbie Lawler won. I didn't think Johnny Hendricks fought very well. And, I also thought Lawler won the first fight. So this kind of just solidified it for me that Robbie Lawler's the better man. And it's always going to be a close matchup, but I do think that he's the better man.
I actually scored this the exact opposite of you. I had it 4-1 for Johnny Hendricks. And I guess for me, I did so for two reasons. Number one, I don't feel like Robbie Lawler really ever put Johnny Hendricks in any amount of danger. Not that that necessarily means that you lose a round, but I felt like Johnny Hendricks exercised more control over the cage. Was the offense more exciting? Absolutely not. But judging on the current judging criteria that I thought were in place, I felt like he controlled the octagon better in 4 of the 5 rounds. I thought Robbie Lawler for sure won the 5th round. There's no question about that. And had that fight gone another 2 rounds, I have no doubt that Lawler would have captured another 2 very decisive rounds. Do you think that an immediate rematch, given the close nature of the 2 fights and the fact that each of the 2 fighters won one of those fights, do you think an immediate rematch is really the only sensible way to go from here?
Yeah, I would assume so. I mean, like we said, both fights were really close, and each guy's taken one, so I think that's the smartest way to go. Unfortunately, that screws over Rory McDonald a little bit, but, if he has to take another fight, he has to take another fight. So, yeah, I think that's the best option here is to go with the rubber match.
Man, it's like you're reading my notes because my third question was, what about Rory McDonald? Because he's won 3 straight fights. But hey, you got there already, so that's good. Co-main event UFC 171 or 181 rather was a lightweight championship fight between Anthony Pettis, who retained his belt in a submission victory over the highly thought of Gilbert Melendez. At this point, Riley, given again we've seen Pettis' success in the striking game, obviously with 2 straight submissions over guys who pretty much everybody thought were better grapplers than he was. He's Pettis, that is displaying a very complete mixed martial arts game. At this point, who is the biggest threat to his belt, if anybody?
Khabib Nurmagomedov. I think that his top game grappling is really solid, and he's very, very strong, and he has good defense on the ground. Although Pettis would definitely outstrike him, I don't think that he could stop his takedowns. And I really do think that Khabib is the biggest threat to the title, and I think he could potentially win the lightweight championship, although Pettis has looked almost unstoppable to this point since that Guida loss.
Yeah, I have to. I agree that the takedowns would be a significant advantage for Nurmagomedov, but would it really matter because he's caught 2 straight on his back submissions, so he seems to be pretty comfortable there.
Well, I mean, and that's a fair point as well. But I just think that Nurmagomedov's background and his top game is so heavy. I think he actually has a heavier top game than a Henderson or a Melendez. And I think Melendez's grappling is a little overrated, to be honest with you. He's a good wrestler, but he's not the greatest, submission wrestler you've ever seen. So, I just think that it's the right type of top game and the pressure that would win. It wouldn't be a pretty fight, but I think that's the type of style it would take to beat a guy like Pettis.
How much longer do you think Gilbert Melendez is going to fight professionally?
I don't know how to answer that one. He's really not old. I mean,
he's 32.
He's been around for a long time, and he's obviously still in his prime. So I would assume a while.
Yeah, I only ask because not so much because of his age, but he's been considered one of the top lightweights since I started really paying attention to mixed martial arts like 7 years ago. So for him to have already been there 7 years ago and all the fighting he did prior to that, he's racked up quite a bit of mileage, and in some of his fights have been pretty brutal wars. So I wonder how much longer. I suppose as long as he can keep competing, we'll probably still see him at least in the UFC because as a guy who has been at the top for so long and does have a reasonably recognizable name, at least among people who are familiar with the sport. He's a guy who's still going to be able to draw, sort of like a Uriah Faber, who may hover around the top of his division while not, exactly getting back to the championship status. Speaking of guys hovering around the top of their division, Travis Brown, the 3rd-ranked UFC heavyweight, handedly defeated Brendan Schaub by TKO in the first round of their fight on Saturday evening. Assuming that Brown probably doesn't get a title shot, next at either at Cain Velasquez or Fabricio Verdum, what do you see as being next for him?
Well, it really depends on what happens with Cain Velasquez, because if Velasquez can return soon enough, he's the next guy for Verdum, so they can unify the titles. So if that's the case scenario, I would say the winner of Junior Dos Santos versus Stipe Miocic would probably be the best bet for him.
Sure.
Because outside of that, there's really no other options. I mean, a lot of guys are coming off losses, and like we said, the heavyweight division is really, really shallow in talent. So I even thought the Schaub fight was a huge step down in competition for him. So it was kind of just one to keep him on track. So I mean, it's really they're just really running out of challengers in that division.
Yeah, this fight was really more revealing about Brendan Schaub than Travis Brown. I mean, as the 3rd-ranked heavyweight, pretty much everybody expected him to do approximately what he did to Brendan Schaub. No disrespect to Schaub. I don't know if you may have heard about this just reading about it on the internet, but I actually listened to the Fighter and the Kid podcast this afternoon.
Yeah.
Where Joe Rogan goes on and he's not mean to Brendan Schaub, but he is brutally honest about where Brendan Schaub stands among his fellow heavyweights. And he basically says, of course this is going to happen. And I'm paraphrasing here, you, Brendan Schaub, don't have the elite level of talent and skill that these other guys in the division do. So if you are going to continue fighting, that's just something you're going to have to deal with. Brendan Schaub, obviously, being a professional fighter, being a man, with a lot of self-pride and self-love, and I say that not in a bad way. Almost didn't, and he points out, like, this is 2 days after his loss to Travis Brown, so obviously he's got a lot of processing to do mentally about where he's at in his career, but he almost, and I understand where he's coming from here, he almost didn't regard Joe Rogan's opinion as valid, because I suppose if you're going to step into the cage against guys like Travis Brown, who are, the word killer is thrown around a lot in MMA, but are ass kickers for real, you have to believe that you have a chance to beat them. Otherwise, what's the point? But yeah, it was a very interesting conversation, and I wanted to make sure I listened to the whole thing before I said anything about it. And Joe Rogan certainly not one to hold back on his opinion, and with him and Brendan Schaub being as good of friends as they are, apparently, it was coming from a place of love, and that's where what Joe Rogan repeatedly said. But he was basically expressing a lot of concern for Brendan Schaub's future brain health, and after the performance we saw on Saturday night, I can't exactly blame him. Riley, what do you see as the most logical path at this point for Brendan Schaub?
Well, I think he can keep fighting if he wants to keep fighting. It's up to him, the brain thing. If you don't want to be, having brain issues, you shouldn't be in a combat sport. You're getting hit in the head, and people have to know that coming into the sport. So it's basically all on them, and it's nobody else's decision but their own. And they're to be accountable for that as well when they have problems down the line. And Schaub, I'm sure, took a few shots to the head in football as well. He was a longtime football player. So again, that's a choice he has to make, and it doesn't sound like he wants to give up MMA, so he shouldn't have to. And again, as light as on talent as the UFC heavyweight division is, he's always going to be welcome there because he probably still can beat half of the division. So that's just how it is.
Interesting you mentioned that a place in the heavyweight division. Brendan Schaub, and he was kind of just throwing this out 2 days after having lost to Travis Brown. He said he estimated 4 more fights, 2 more years, and a possible cut to 205 pounds. About that last item, do you think that would be an intelligent move for Schaub to cut to light heavyweight?
I don't know if he could make it, honestly. He's a big framed guy, and he's very muscular. Other than like his belly, there's really not a lot of fat on him either. He's actually pretty cut for a heavyweight. So I don't know if he could do that, and honestly, I don't know if it would make much of a difference. I think there's more better fighters at light heavyweight than there are at heavyweight at this point.
Yeah. The only other thing that is really of note to come out of that episode of the podcast was Joe Rogan, and I'm sure this isn't actually going to happen because the UFC probably heard this and is going to throw a bunch of money his way. Or whenever his contract is up with them. But he sort of alluded to the fact that he's starting to have sort of inner conflict about his job as like an active promoter of fights, given what he has learned about what the sport does to people that he knows and people that he cares about. And I feel this. I understand where he's coming from because it's sort of that duality where you love to watch the sport. It's exciting. You respect the effort that goes into getting to the level that people get to when they're in the UFC, especially when they're at those upper echelons of the UFC. But at the same time, that a certain percentage of the people that we enjoy watching now, 15 years from now, are going to be like shells of their former selves. So, obviously people know what they're getting into at this point. I only hope that the people that are making a lot of money off the backs of these fighters come through for them when they really need it in the future. That's just my opinion. Heavyweight division, another fight took place in the heavyweight division on Saturday night, and it was a quick one, and talk about potential brain injury. Todd Duffy knocking Anthony Hamilton the F out in like 30 seconds in the first round. I'm just going to, let's cut right to the chase here, Riley. Who's the highest ranked guy that you would still bet on Todd Duffy if he was fighting against them?
I honestly, with his power and the way he can get started very quickly, I think he can beat a lot of guys in the UFC just based on power because he has the hands to do it, and it doesn't take a lot for a heavyweight to knock another heavyweight out because that's 250 pounds of force,
right?
Plus how whatever else he's putting into it, going towards someone's head. So, I think Duffy, if he's able to stay more active as he hasn't been able to in, the last year or two or whatever, how long, he was almost out 2 years or something like that.
Yep.
he really does have the tools to be someone special in a division that, again, for the 50th time, is very light on talent. So, he should take a big leap up here and take on a guy that can test him and see if he's ready for the elites. Because up until the Russo knockout and the exit from the UFC the first time, he really was a guy that was fast tracking to the top, and he was beating up Mike Russo before that freak knockout. So, this kid's obviously talented.
Do you think he deserves to be in the Travis Brown, Junior Dos Santos, Stipe Miocic mix, or would it be more like the Alistair Overeem, Gabriel Gonzaga, Matt Mitrione type of situation?
Oh, it's definitely not up to the. Let's not jump the gun here. I mean, he just beat a guy that wasn't even in the top 20 of the UFC. Obviously, I thought highly of Anthony Hamilton. I do think he's a solid fighter, but he wasn't anywhere near the top 20 yet.
Right.
And and Duffy has had chances against. And remember, he fought Overeem, although I think it was Overeem when he was still on enhancers and got knocked out pretty quickly. So he's going to have to work his way up. Obviously not the elite yet, but again, he has the tools to do it.
Lightweight division fight opened up the main card of UFC 181. Tony Ferguson in an impressive submission victory over Abel Trujillo. Ferguson is still not ranked despite having won 4 in a row. What does he have to do to get more attention to himself?
You're going to have to keep winning fights and, keep doing them against high-ranked opponents. Most of the guys he's beaten aren't top 25 yet. Trujillo was probably the first guy that was ranked top 25 that he beat. So that's obviously going to move him up the ladder even more. And he honestly he went from being on one of the worst seasons of The Ultimate Fighter in terms of talent and excitement, and it has become really a guy to watch in that UFC lightweight division. He has really, really progressed, and that's very, very encouraging because he's a guy that always brings the fight. He's aggressive and he's exciting, and that's the type of guy that they want to see.
Yeah, 100% agree with you. I personally can't wait to see Tony Ferguson fight again. I think he got a little bit of a unnecessary bad rap, and probably a little bit from me included, for his what I thought was not deserving position in the co-main event of UFC 177. That was more circumstantial than anything else, and that had nothing to do with him. He and Danny Castillo still did exactly what they needed to do. But it was nice to see Tony Ferguson come out after that and really put a stamp, not put the stamp on a guy, but really have an impressive performance to be like, see, UFC fans, I deserve to be on the main card of a pay-per-view at least, and he absolutely does. Any other fights from UFC 181 you want to talk about?
I just wanted to talk about the Josh Salmon head kick knockout. That honestly might be one of the knockouts of the year. That was just such a beautifully placed, almost as accurate can get, placed kick, put the shin right on the jaw. Outside of the Damasio Page one-punch knockout at Legacy a few months ago, I think that Salmon knockout might be the second best knockout of the year.
Well, I'll have another comparison for you in the rapid fire section, but we'll get to that when we get to that.
Sounds good.
Invicta FC 10 also came to us this weekend on UFC Fight Pass. Erica Tiburcio defeats Michelle Watterson by submission in round 3. Riley, is this the upset of the year?
I don't know if it's the upset of the year, but it was definitely a big shocker. If you remember what I said last week, I said I think Watterson will win, but don't be surprised at how good she is.
Right.
And this was her in a new weight class too. This was her first ever fight at 105. She's always fought as a 115, or a very small straw weight, that is. She's only 4'11". She's very, very short, but she's kind of stocky and she's built. So. This 105 move was definitely the right way to go, and she knew that her strength was on the ground, and she got it there, and that's why she won.
Any other fights of note from Invicta that you want to mention?
The Deanna Bennett, Jennifer Maia fight. Deanna Bennett, again, proving why, in my opinion, one of the best prospects in women's MMA right now, continues to be undefeated, and in my opinion, probably earned a title shot at Barb Honchak in doing so.
Roxanne Modafferi, again, successful in her latest fight for Invicta, so I gotta give props to Roxy as well. Other fights from RFA, Bama, KSW, or 1FC that you want to shout out real quick?
There's just so many fights. But your buddy Pujanowski pulled off a win, so that was big. But yeah, speaking of KSW, Mohamed Khalidov knocks off another big name guy in Brett Cooper and does it with relative ease. So he just again is proving why he's such a great fighter, and B, possibly the best fighter not in the UFC, and I will put a stamp on that.
Look out for Mohamed Khalidov. And so right now he's the best fighter not in the UFC. How soon before we see him in the UFC?
I don't think we will ever see him in the UFC, unfortunately, which is really, really sad, unless they go to Poland and they give him some kind of deal where he doesn't have to compete full-time with the UFC. Because I know for a fact that he makes a very, very healthy amount of money in Poland fighting for KSW as their poster boy, and he's even admitted that, he has religious reasons why he doesn't, train or work year-round. So it's really just circumstances that are out of the UFC's grasp, because, in all honesty, if they could, they'd have him.
Do you think the UFC, and I assume what you're referring to, given Khalidov's first name, I have to assume that he is a Muslim.
Yes.
Do you think the UFC will ever begin? Because I mean, they're starting to have guys like Khabib Nurmagomedov, who are Islam practicing Eastern Europeans. Do you think they'll ever start to run into similar issues as you're describing with Khalidov?
Well, first off, I mean, I'll correct you. It's really not that big of a deal. But Nurmagomedov is not Eastern European. He's actually Chechenian, which is, that's a South Caucasus. It's more an Asian region.
All right.
But,
I'm on the border at least.
Yeah, right. And it wasn't a big deal, but it's kind of something that people always get confused with. That Chechenians aren't actually Russian. They're from a Caucasus that's right outside Russia. That's considered as a province of it.
Right.
But are you asking, will they start moving into Muslim countries?
No. I'm saying like there's a decent number of fighters that probably during Ramadan they fast during the day and everything like that, and that probably impacts their training.
Right.
Do you think that this will ever impact? It's kind of a stupid question. So you know what? I'm gonna.
No. Actually, I think I have an answer for that. It's if you think about it, not all religious people are that religious. You have Catholics, who aren't supposed to do certain things, but they do them anyways. But they're still observing Catholics, so you probably have the same thing. I went to college with some kids that were Muslims that they're not supposed to be drinking, but they went to college and drank. They're observing Muslims, but they're not observing every law. So it just depends. Khalidov might be more religious and all that stuff than these other guys who may be also Muslim as well.
Moving on from the touchy topic of religion to the less touchy topic of the Ultimate Fighter 20 finale. We've got 4 fighters right now that we know of that are still in the hunt. We've got Jessica Penne, we've got Rose Namajunas, we've got Carla Esparza, and we've got Randa Marcos still in the hunt. Of these 4 fighters, Riley, which do you... I'm trying to think of how to word this properly. Which do you see having the most long-term success in the UFC?
Well, I've always said that wrestling is king in women's MMA because it's just such a young sport. So It's hard not to pick Carla Esparza. But just seeing what Rose Namajunas has done on the show thus far, she's a finisher, and she's very technical, and she's flashy. She has the star power to have people get behind her. And she's really skilled. I mean, you saw her beat Joanne Calderwood with a Kimura.
Yeah.
In a really, really entertaining fight, in my opinion. Those two immediately jump out at me, but there's a couple on the show that I could really think of. I think it's just such a close division at this point. Mm-hmm. And you got to remember that there's women outside of the Ultimate Fighter that didn't make the house because they couldn't speak English and stuff that also have a really bright future as well. So I think the division in general is just very strong and has a chance to last.
We will talk about 2 of those non-Ultimate Fighter participating light or strawweight fighters in just a few minutes. It's really a toss-up for me here because Jessica Penne, the thing that impresses me or that gives me the most hope about her is her length. She seems to have the ability to keep a lot of fighters at bay. She's obviously a very intelligent fighter, so and that can be really said for all 4 of these women here. Carla Esparza with the wrestling, you're absolutely right on point there. Rose Namajunas has, I think, the most potential right now just because of her young age, because she's 22 years old. So I can't wait to see what she's like when she's 26. 4 years training kickboxing with Pat Barry. She's gonna be quite talented. And then Randa Marcos just has this grit, like this grittiness about her that is frankly like this indomitable fighting spirit. She's kind of a low-key figure, been a low-key figure on the show, but when she's needed to show up, boy has she ever. So it'll be tough to count her out any time in the near future as well. So
And again, with like you were saying with Marco, she's gritty. But again, I said at the beginning of this season that wrestling is going to carry people, and she's the other person on the show that has like an amateur wrestling background.
Right.
And I think that's why she succeeded. That's how she beat Tisha Torres, and that's how she beat Felice Herrig. So, you know, you see the parallels there. Esparza, Marcos, the two wrestlers on the show, both in the semifinals. Most of the other girls are kickboxers.
Very much looking forward to this tomorrow's episode, Wednesday's episode of The Ultimate Fighter, where the finalists will be revealed, and then, of course, the finals themselves airing on Fox Sports 1 coming up this Friday. The other fight I want to touch on real quick is the featherweight contest. 10th ranked Jeremy Stephens takes on 14th ranked Charles Oliveira. Both of these, I mean, Jeremy Stephens won 3 fights in a row at featherweight, then dropped one to Cub Swanson. Charles Oliveira has seemed like a guy with an enormous amount of potential, but he just seems to get caught kind of when he gets to a certain level. Can either of these guys break through to kind of the elite levels of the featherweight division, a very crowded division at that?
I mean, absolutely. I mean, anybody's got a chance at this point, and I think Oliveira more than Stephens, since I think the age difference. You know, Stephens isn't old, but he's old in fight years, and Oliveira is still really young, actually.
25 only.
Right. So, they're both up there. And again, the featherweight division is a Shark Tank, but these two are sharks. Okay, so I mean, I really do think that these are both really good guys. You have Oliveira, who can beat you in so many different ways. You know, he's actually a very underrated striker, but his ground game is amazing and not talked about as much. He tapped out Hatsu Hioki, who people consider one of the best grapplers in the featherweight division. And then you got Stephens, who's always one punch away from winning a fight. I mean, he literally might have the best one-punch knockout power in the featherweight division. So, I mean, they're both there. They're both top 15 guys right now for sure.
Who do you have on Friday night?
I think Oliveira sometimes blocks too many punches with his face, and that's not a thing you want to do against Jeremy Stephens. So I do think that Stephens will find a way to actually put him down with strikes.
I'm going to go with Oliveira on this one. He likes to do that opening blitz, and I think that he's going to catch Stephens early, and that's going to be it. Any other fights from the Ultimate Fighter finale on Friday night that you want to talk about?
I'm just excited for the KJ Noons Darren Cruikshank fight. I think that's a really good matchup on paper, and both guys are flashy strikers. So if you like flashy striking, that should be an interesting one. Unless Cruikshank takes the wrestling out of his back pocket, then he could, that's Noons' weakness, and he can expose that, and that'd be a big win for Darren Cruikshank.
I know we're supposed to be objective and everything, but there's something about KJ Noons that I just don't know. I just don't. Rubs me the wrong way. So I'll be rooting for the Detroit superstar Friday night. Saturday night, again, probably, like, if you've got friends, both of our regular viewers here, if you've got friends that are into MMA or have even expressed any curiosity about this, direct them to Fox on Saturday night, because boy, oh boy, is there a card with a whole lot of potential for awesomeness coming at us on Saturday night. I love this main event, Riley. Junior Dos Santos, second-ranked heavyweight, taking on Stipe Miocic, fourth-ranked heavyweight. I mean, this fight is easily a pay-per-view co-main event. And in a pinch, could have even been a main event on a pay-per-view with a nice, a supporting stacked lineup as well. One not unlike the one that we're seeing for free on Saturday night. Regardless of what happens, though, between Dos Santos and Miocic, can either of these guys beat either Cain Velasquez or Fabricio Verdum, in your opinion?
I don't think Miocic can. I do like him as a youngish heavyweight that's still getting better. But I do think that Dos Santos can beat Verdum again. He has good enough takedown defense against Verdum, and although Verdum's striking's improved, Dos Santos doesn't get caught as much as Hunt, because Hunt relies on his chin more and Dos Santos relies more on his movement.
Right.
So I think that a quick athletic guy like Dos Santos still gives Verdum problems. So that's no for Miocic to either, and I don't think JDS beats Velasquez again, but I do think he beats Verdum. Given
that Velasquez then he's the reigning actual heavyweight champion, we're going to see him back at some point. And, in terms of an early pick, I can't see him losing to Verdum, although, I think pretty much I've said that about every single opponent that Verdum's had in the last couple of years. Where does the winner of this fight find himself realistically in the heavyweight division, given that we've got such a dominant champion in Velasquez that frankly, like in speaking of Dos Santos, he has lost to Velasquez twice, and it was not close in either fight.
Yeah, it's weird because again, the champion's held up by injury yet again. So you have the interim champion, and eventually they're going to have to combine it. I'll go back to my original thing. I think the winner of this fight should fight Travis Brown, unless Verdum and Velasquez don't fight in due time. Then they got to find somebody to take the title shot, and I think Brown is before these two guys because he's in line. But then again, Dos Santos has history with Verdum, so he could have a claim. So it's really tough.
Fight pick for the main event on Saturday night.
Junior Dos Santos, knockout, first round.
Gonna agree with you there as well. And the co-main event is actually the fight I am most interested in. Third-ranked lightweight Rafael Dos Anjos takes on 14th ranked Nate Diaz in a lightweight match that will definitely determine where each of these fighters stand in the overall contenders picture. Is Nate Diaz's 14th ranking accurate?
No, he's higher than that, but he hasn't fought in a while. Remember, he held out. So that's probably why that happened. But, I have always, for some reason, just not trusted Rafael Dos Anjos.
Even after knocking out Benson Henderson?
And that was the one that sold me finally. I was going to get to that. I don't know. There's something about him. I just couldn't trust him. And the win over Henderson was big. Now, that being said, I do think that Diaz has a style that does not match up well against a lot of people.
Yep.
If Dos Anjos wants to stay on the feet, he's content to stay on the feet. He's going to pay for it because Diaz is a volume boxer with amazing cardio, and he doesn't give you any space to breathe, and that's going to hurt Dos Anjos because he's aggressive himself, and he's going to be running into a myriad of punches from a guy that throws a lot of them. And if Dos Anjos does try and get him down, Diaz is no picnic on the ground either. I know Dos Anjos is a very good jiu-jitsu guy, but Diaz is very unorthodox and very crafty from his back and on top. So I just don't think this is a great matchup for him. So I'm taking Nate Diaz here despite the long layoff.
Wow, all right. I'm going to go with Dos Anjos here, but let's talk about both scenarios. I mean, if Nate Diaz wins, I don't think he's going to enter into the title picture, not only because of his, he's got a couple losses recently, but also because of, I think, kind of where he stands, and the fact that the lightweight division is totally stacked with really talented fighters. But if Rafael Dos Anjos does defeat Nate Diaz on Saturday night, and Khabib Nurmagomedov has like an injury layoff that just kind of continues on indefinitely as it is right now, do you think Dos Anjos then deserves the next title shot against Anthony Pettis?
Yeah, should he beat Diaz? I definitely think he's next. But if Khabib is actually healthy, I don't think so because Khabib beat Dos Anjos fairly easily. So it just depends on where Khabib is and if the UFC wants to give Khabib a shot.
Chances that Nate Diaz remains in the UFC through the year 2015.
It's just so tough. He doesn't like the sponsorship deal. He hasn't been getting along with the UFC brass. Depending how many fights he has left on his contract, you may not see him by the end of 2015. So it just depends on a bunch of factors. Heavyweight
non-title fight, heavyweight fight taking place on the undercard of the main card, UFC on Fox 13. We've got I think it's safe to say, former pound-for-pound guy, probably a few years ago, Alistair Overeem, currently 11th ranked in the UFC's heavyweight rankings, taking on 15th ranked Stefan Struve. Riley, what are the chances this one ends by some kind of kick?
I doubt it. I think it's going to end by a hand. I think that, again, we said it earlier about people blocking punches with their face. Stefan Struve is like the king of that, unfortunately, and it doesn't help that he's 6'11", so guys are punching upward at him, and that can generate a lot of power. That's why overhand rights are so devastating. You can tell, Roy Nelson about it. He's actually finished him like that. And although Overeem has looked really crappy lately, this is just a matchup that he should not have a problem with. Struve doesn't exactly have a granite chin. And he's been popped many times, and that's a guy I'm concerned for. He's young and he's been knocked out this many times. So I think Overeem starts off fast like he normally does, and then assuming he doesn't gas out, he puts down Struve in one round.
hypothetically say Stefan Struve does win, he was on a decent run before his loss to Mark Hunt. I'm just going to guess by your comments. Would it be accurate to say that you don't think that he is a heavyweight title contender in any fashion?
Not yet. The long layoff is too big of a factor there, and obviously the loss to Hunt. So he would only be on a 1-fight streak in almost 2 years of not fighting. So.
Over or under, Alistair Overeem has 3 more fights in the UFC.
Since he's still a draw, I'd say probably over.
Sticking with Overeem, because, like we've repeatedly said, the heavyweight division kind of bereft of stars, and the fact that Overeem's still a pretty big draw. How many losses in a row do you think he would have to have before the UFC cuts him?
3 or 4. I think either on the 3rd or the 4th loss in a row, I think they'd give him his walking paper, especially because he's not cheap. So.
Right. Another heavyweight fight taking place to open the main card on Saturday night. Gabriel Gonzaga, 12th ranked in the heavyweight division, taking on 14th ranked Matt Mitrione. These guys have, I forget how many wins between them, but among their wins, they've only been to decision once. What are the chances that this one ends before the final bell?
I actually predict this one to go to decision, which is kind of funny now that you say that, because Gonzaga's a tough guy, and Mitrione, he's going to be fending off a lot of takedown attempts, so it's going to be a very strategic chess match, in my opinion. And in this fight, I just think Mitrione's too athletic, too quick. A guy his size should not be that quick. He really is nimble for a guy that size. So I think he's going to dance around. He's going to hit him with some combinations. He's going to bloody him up a little bit, but he's going to have to avoid the takedown. And again, a former defensive lineman is used to pushing guys off. So I think that he's going to outstrike him. He'll hurt him at points, but not finish him, and he'll get his hand raised against a credible, tough opponent.
I think I like Mitrione in this one too. He is nimble, he is quite athletic, but he's 36 years old. Gonzaga, 34 years old, with probably a little more mileage on the old body than Matt Mitrione, at least in terms of mixed martial arts. Which of these guys do you think will remain in the UFC longer?
I don't know. That's a tough question again, because you're right. Mitrione played pro football. He's played football for a long time, so that's mileage on his body, and that's a lot of wear and tear as well. It really, Gonzaga, if you remember, this is his second stint, so he probably doesn't have as much rope to hang himself with,
right.
As opposed to Mitrione, who came in here as a 0-0 pro, no pro fights, and has really just outstayed his welcome. He has really, really impressed a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
When I watched The Ultimate Fighter, I said this is a guy that'll probably be around for 2 or 3 fights, and then he'll be sent packing, and either he'll compete on the regional scene for a little bit and then fizzle out, or he'll just give it up and be a family man. And I was way wrong, and he's not the guy that he was on The Ultimate Fighter. He is a lot better.
We've got one other fight I want to talk about, Riley, given your expertise in the world of women's mixed martial arts. We've got your third-ranked, or I suppose our third-ranked in the CombatPress.com women's rankings, third-ranked strawweight Claudia Gadelha taking on fifth-rate, and I'm going to slaughter this name, Joanna Jedrzejczyk. Is that
That's close enough, yeah. Yes, I think it's Joanna Jedrzejczyk.
They're fighting each other. Both of these strawweights, obviously, among the elites, in the opinion of the staff or of the rankings keepers, Riley, Rob Tatum, and Brian Henderson at CombatPress.com. And is Dan Cool part of that panel as well?
Yes, he is.
Shout out to Dan Cool. Thoughts? So obviously, these two women on a collision course, having been both signed by the UFC and both not being present on this season of The Ultimate Fighter. Riley, you mentioned in your rankings that you think that this is probably the number one contenders eliminator to face whoever ends up being successful on Friday night to win the inaugural strawweight championship. So just initial thoughts on this fight and your pick for it.
Very, very interesting. A striker versus grappler. If you watch, Joanna's first fight in the UFC, she absolutely decimated Juliana Lima from the outside. Her just crisp punches, very aggressive style. She's a beast. If you watched her fight with Rosie Sexton, that one-punch knockout scared me. There's no way a woman that is 115 pounds should generate that kind of power. and she's really good. She's going to have her takedown defense tested, though, because Claudia Gadelha is a big, strong woman for 115 pounds, which is why she can never make the weight cut. She would have never made the weight cut on The Ultimate Fighter. And she's got a really, really strong top submission game. Now, her knock on her has been her cardio and gas tank. So if Joanna can weather the early storm and work the body like she did against Lima, she can wear her down, and she can very easily win this fight. But it's a matter of staying on her feet and staying away from the takedown.
Given that, your, I think, correct emphasis that in the world of women's mixed martial arts, one's grappling ability, particularly wrestling, seems to serve to their advantage. Are you taking Gadelha in this one?
I am going to, but I mean, I would not be surprised if she gasses out and Yadresa can capitalize. But to this point, I haven't seen any reason why Gadelha can't win this fight, because she has beaten some really, really tough competition.
Other fights from the preliminary portion on Saturday night that you want to call out real quick?
Yeah, it's kind of a random one, but the battle of the UFC Bellator vets, Ben Saunders versus Joe Riggs.
Sure.
Kind of interested to see that one, actually. Joe Riggs has kind of gone through like a career resurgence, and it was all because of that Bellator Fight Master, which nobody watched except for me. And he looked good in the finale, although he did take on a one-dimensional striker. He looked good on the show, and it looks like he's taking training seriously again, and he looks like a guy that's, ready for his second chance. And then you have Ben Saunders, who I've always been very high on. He's never going to be an elite welterweight, but he's always going to be that mid-card guy you can count on for a big finish or a fun fight. Guy's clinch game is unbelievable with the knees and the elbows. Very interested to see this clash of styles.
I think the guy who on the undercard I'm most interested in seeing is Henry Cejudo, given his amazing wrestling credentials. Obviously fighting a division up from, or I suppose a half a division, if you want to be technical about it, up from where he was fighting before, and he takes on a very tough opponent in Dustin Kimura. So I think this will be the kind of the real test to see if Cejudo can make it in mixed martial arts, and it'll be a good one.
We'll see if he wakes it to the weigh-ins first.
Yeah. World Series of Fighting 15. We got a couple fights here. Husimar Palhares takes on John Fitch for the World Series of Fighting welterweight title. What are the chances that this one ends in controversial fashion?
Controversial fashion? It's hard.
Palhares,
Oh, you think he's going to hold on to a hold too long?
I don't know.
It's possible. It's possible, but being under the scope, he's got to be careful. I think Fitch is really, really strong on the ground, but he's kind of a guy that just kind of holds position and tries to, maybe land a few shots and not do a whole lot, maybe eventually look for a submission. Palhares is extremely aggressive on the ground, and he's good off of his back. I mean, he's got arm bars. We always think of him as the leg lock guy, but he's very good at throwing up arm bars as well. Yeah. So, and on the feet, I actually think Palhares has gotten very not great, but very solid at using his strikes to set other things up.
Right.
And I don't think Fitch has advanced his striking enough. As a guy that's been around at the elite level as long as he has, I don't think he's really improved his striking that much. I might also be biased because I'm not a huge John Fitch fan, but I'm taking Palhares here. So. Yeah,
I mean, it'll be telling here to see, because Palhares is a very stout welterweight. He's right. Not like a long, lean type of fighter. And John Fitch has been fighting for quite some time. He's been in a few wars, so maybe his takedown abilities that were there 10 years ago, 7 years ago, aren't really there anymore. And against a guy with the sort of elite grappling that Palhares has demonstrated along with his frame, I think Fitch is going to have a hell of a time implementing his typical offense. The featherweight title also up for grabs on Saturday night's World Series of Fighting event. A couple of guys with really impressive records. Rick Glenn and Lance Palmer vying for that title. Riley, your thoughts on these two gentlemen?
Oh, both awesome prospects. These were guys I've had my eye on for the last couple of years. Rick Glenn's part of that Rufus Sport Camp, and he really has outdone expectations. Even in my eyes, I thought he was going to be very good. I didn't think that he was ready for Georgie Karakhanyan in his last fight, and he fought off a hell of an armbar to come back and just decimate Karakhanyan. So he's past my expectations earlier than I thought he would. I think he's going to be a really great fighter in the future. But then you got a guy like Lance Palmer, whose wrestling is just so strong, and he's with the Team Alpha Male and really getting in good reps, and you can tell he's working hard on his striking, and he's obviously not there yet in terms of being a great striker, but his wrestling is so good, and he's got the guillotine choke, and he's got all these other tools that this is really going to be an interesting fight.
Who do you have emerging victorious?
Oh, it's really hard to pick. I really want to take Rick Glenn, but there's just something in me that says Lance Palmer's wrestling is going to deliver here.
Any other fights from World Series of Fighting 15 that you want to mention?
I hadn't checked out the card before we came here, but I know that there was a fight that I was looking for. I got to think of it right now. Give me a second if my computer wants to function here. Yes, it was Shaman Moraes versus Gabriel Solario. Shaman Moraes is a really, really great prospect coming out of Brazil. Expecting big things out of him, and I'm really excited to see how he does when he comes stateside.
All right. Big news this week. It's not often that I watch something on TV and react audibly in shock and surprise. Because, when I was reading the rumors that the UFC, oh, yeah, maybe blah, 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 they're interested in CM Punk, I was like, yeah, right. Why? But then, Phil CM Punk Brooks is on my UFC pay-per-view broadcast on Saturday night, and he and Joe Rogan are telling me that CM Punk is going to he's been signed by the UFC, and that he's going to fight, quote-unquote, for real. And I don't mean as to say the UFC is not real, but professional wrestling is violent ballet, whereas MMA is actual real competitive fighting. Riley, I've got some thoughts on this, and I'm going to write a column about kind of how the UFC should probably handle this in my mind, coming out later this week on Combat Press. But let's get your thoughts on this right off the bat. What was your initial reaction to hearing CM Punk coming out and saying, "Hey, I'm going to fight for the UFC"?
Oh, it's a smart move by the UFC. They had a down year this year in pay-per-views and stuff, and they're looking for draws. They want Brock Lesnar back. They want GSP back. They're literally looking for anybody that's going to help them make money. So it's smart. It blew up the social media world. It blew up the MMA media world. It blew up the wrestling media world. Now, is he ever gonna challenge for a UFC title? No. It's a novelty fight, but it's a smart move. I mean, a lot of people are really upset about it. It's like, why? Who cares?
Yeah.
It's a guy who has some, you might say, oh, he doesn't have an amateur wrestling background like Lesnar. He's not really a Muay Thai fighter or anything like that. I mean, he comes from a world of professional wrestling, and even if you're not a fighter, you know some basic things, and it doesn't matter. It's like, he's a draw. Don't be jealous that a guy that's probably going to earn more pay-per-views than most of the other guys in the rosters coming to town, right? And it's the same thing. Strikeforce did this stuff all the time. You had your Herschel Walkers. Dream did it with Jose Canseco. You're getting guys that are going to garner attention, and the UFC had a down year. There's no denying that, and this is something that's going to help them out. And, I'm sure Punk's going to make a pretty penny doing it himself, but he's going to earn it because he's a fantastic promoter, and, he's a guy that fans are interested in seeing.
And not only MMA fans, but pro wrestling fans, and generally, if you're a nerd and you watch, Chris Hardwick's show at midnight or, listen to the Nerdist podcast, you know who CM Punk is. And, if you've been to Comic-Con, you know who CM Punk is. So this is a potential for them to draw in a really wide audience. I agree that I don't really understand the blowback here because, worst case scenario, dude's not prepared, and he literally gets his ass kicked on national television. So, and best case scenario, he's very successful, and that's good. So, either way, people who don't think he belongs in the sport are either going to be surprised by his success or satisfied in the fact that he gets his ass kicked by someone who is trained for much longer. So, I don't understand the blowback. And this isn't even the first time the UFC has done this type of stunt casting. You'll remember when James Toney stepped in the octagon to take on Randy, 50-year-old James Toney took on Randy Couture. A little bit of a different situation for a couple of reasons here, but, it's certainly not a move without precedence. I think the UFC should build its biggest card ever around CM Punk, strictly because of how many people are going to be brought in strictly by his presence. So you've got him, you've got John Jones, you've got Ronda Rousey, maybe bring back Anderson Silva, somebody that's guaranteed to have an exciting fight like Matt Brown and CM Punk. You know, I don't know how many more pay-per-views the UFC is going to have unless they have some breakout, you know, crossover star that is going to do a million pay-per-views. But if they structure a pay-per-view correctly and all the pieces come together, this could do a million pay-per-view buys, in my opinion.
The only problem with that is they're not going to show their hand on that many champions being on one card, especially two of their biggest drawing champions in Rousey and Jones. So, I mean, in theory, it's a great idea, but you have to not put all your eggs in one basket. You have to think. You got to stretch it out. So, if they wanted to do that, they could do maybe another champion, or maybe one of those champions and maybe a lower champion. You could always do like John Jones and Demetrius Johnson, and then CM Punk, and then yeah, you're right. A guy like Matt Brown would be great for that card. You know, Carlos Condit, somebody like that, you know. So you're on the right track, but again, you can't have Rousey and Jones on the same card.
I guess I disagree, because I think that the UFC is stacked enough with exciting fighters to be able to absorb having Jones and Rousey. Because I mean, I didn't mention Cain Velasquez, I didn't mention Chris Weidman, I didn't mention Johnny Hendricks or Robbie Lawler. Robbie Lawler, perhaps one of the most exciting fighters. I didn't even talk about the lightweight division here. So I think that if the UFC is really wanting to go like get the bang for their buck here, they need to stack it as much as possible, knowing, again, in my opinion, that they have the exciting fighters and enough draws to be able to at least get decent pay-per-view numbers from other shows moving forward. Yeah, so excited, positive, negative, you know, whatever you think about the CM Punk signing. I'm certainly going to watch every single fight he has in the UFC. That was my first thought. Like, regardless, I'm going to watch it. And I'm sure you feel the same way, and that's exactly what the UFC is going for.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm with you there.
All right, let's go for rapid fire before we get to our wrestling minute. True or false, Riley, Robbie Lawler is the fighter of the year for 2014?
I have to say false. Only on he did lose the one fight to Hendricks, although he has had an amazing year. I don't think he actually walks away with the Fighter of the Year award.
Who instead does?
See, that's tough because I haven't, you know, I mean, Chris Weidman could be up there. He had a really great year. You know, it's really just tough to call at this point because I'm trying to think of the top guys, and you know, Demetrius Johnson could easily be a guy that's considered, but you know, he's probably not going to be. T.J. Dillashaw is another guy that I would consider. He probably had the most surprising and best year in total.
I'm going to stick with Robbie Lawler for mine. I understand that he lost to Hendricks, but I don't think a fighter needs to go undefeated to be Fighter of the Year, particularly when you avenge that loss at the end of the year to win the belt that you've been slowly working your way up to get. Right. So I think he's got the best story. I think he's certainly got the credentials with his wins this year, despite the loss to Hendricks. So you know, early call, only, you know, early December here, but Robbie Lawler definitely hands down my Fighter of the Year for 2014.
I'm gonna stick with Dillashaw.
If you're Uriah Faber's manager, what advice do you have for him at this point?
Keep fighting. He makes big enough paychecks where he can keep taking these novelty fights and just keep on chugging, you know. And eventually, they're not gonna be able to deny it if he keeps winning. You know, you only win so many times before you get a title shot. And it's not like he's been fighting chumps either. You know, Francisco Rivera was a legit opponent. Now, obviously, he was a very bad matchup for Rivera, but you know, still, you know, a win's a win against a guy that is well regarded in that division.
We talked earlier about Josh Saman's knockout, fantastic knockout over Eddie Gordon. Which knockout was better, that one or Joe Schilling's over Melvin Manhoef?
I like Saman's better. I'm a sucker for a head kick, but that head kick was just so perfect and accurate that I watched it about 10 times in a row, slow motion. I even watched it in fast motion once just to see how it looked like a cruise missile attack. It was crazy.
So CM Punk, obviously, former professional wrestler, tough SOB, making his UFC debut sometime in 2015. I may have asked this question before, but whatever, I'm going to ask it again. Which other current professional wrestler would you most like to give MMA a go?
Well, you know, obviously Lesnar and Del Rio can't count because they've already fought, I'm assuming, yeah.
Sure.
Just based on wrestling pedigree in total, I'd love to see Jack Swagger give it a run.
Yeah.
You know, he was such a great amateur wrestler in his time in college. You know, and he could really use that as his background. And it's not like he's a huge piece to the WWE puzzle at this point. And you know, they tried to make him back in the day, and it just didn't work out. Honestly, I think he's a better babyface than he ever was a heel, and he's doing very well right now. Especially enjoyed him on Raw this week. But you know, I mean, he wouldn't be a huge draw, unfortunately.
No.
But I mean, he could totally give it a try and be successful just based on his wrestling pedigree.
I think, you know, obviously he wouldn't be a huge draw, but I think that there would be just like, you know, Brock Lesnar has ascended to the top of the professional wrestling world. CM Punk was at that level for quite some time as well. Jack Swagger, you know, kind of was a main event type guy when he first started, but obviously, you know, that hasn't really panned out for him. But nevertheless, I think the novelty, to use the word that we've used a few times, of another former professional wrestler trying his hand at MMA would at least make him a slightly bigger draw than, say, your average MMA fighter. Not that, you know, not that that would be a significant number, but yeah, I would love to see Swagger given his wrestling background.
Only
and I know
if he has Coulter at his side. If he doesn't have Zeb Coulter, he has to have him.
The other person that I'd like to see give it a try, and I know that this is impossible, not only given his history of injuries, but the fact that, you know, you have to basically quit, lose a whole bunch of weight, and then train, you know, compete in a division, you know, full of killers, would be Daniel Bryan. Just given his grappling that he does with Neil Mellinson.
No, I don't. He'd be worse off than Punk, I think. So
probably. So I'm only about 5'10", and I don't think that I could fight a guy who's 7 feet tall like Stefan Struve. Riley, you're 6'4". Would you feel comfortable fighting a guy who's 7 feet tall?
Would I need training first?
It wouldn't be against a professional fighter. It wouldn't be against Stefan Struve. If there was just a dude who was 7 feet tall and he was, you know, being a jerk.
Yeah, because I'd just shoot a double leg on him, and, you know, he's not tall once he's down, so it's just, you know, if he wasn't a jacked up dude that looked crazy, yeah, I mean, if he's being a dick, then yeah, I'd take him.
What about in a striking only situation?
Well, yeah, because I'd take Boss Rutan's advice and just kick him in the nuts, so.
I guess that is one strike you can go to against a top guy.
Yeah,
the final rapid-fire question here. Corey Beeston 25-8 Anderson, is that a great nickname or the greatest nickname?
It's like the most mediocrely awesome nickname. It's such a stupid nickname, but it's so that's something I always think of. I'm like, that's actually, like, it's so stupid it's memorable. I actually really like it. I like stupid things like that. So Corey Anderson's nickname, cool by me.
I like hearing Bruce Buffer go, the winner by unanimous decision, Corey Beeston 25-8 Anderson.
Beeston 25-8 sounds like an energy pill that's about to go off the market.
It's like, no, there would be Beeston, but then there would be like the extra strength one, which would be Beeston 25-8. That would also have alcohol in it or something.
And then it'd probably have like a lightning bolt between the 5 and the 8.
Yeah, exactly. You know, this is a marketing idea that I think we should tackle and get Corey Beeston 25-8 Anderson in on the deal.
I'm already talking to his manager.
We'll talk about it after the program.
Yeah.
Finally, then, before we close things out, Riley, I want to talk about Ring of Honor Final Battle, which was so good. But as always, I'll give you the floor for Wrestling Minute first.
Yeah, I'm not going to talk that much about wrestling this week. You know, I watched Raw, but nothing really stood out a bunch. You know, but I did honestly like the very, very brief promo by Jack Swagger. It was short, sweet, had emotion in it, and then he got the business. So I kind of mentioned that before, but I did enjoy that because, you know, he never talks. So you know, he said, "You broke Zeb's leg, and now I'm coming to break your ankle." Spiked the microphone, ran to the ring, and basically beat down Rusev. Now, obviously, he's probably going to lose to Rusev in the feud again, but it's a dimension of Swagger we don't see enough, and I really do like his ring work. So hopefully they can build it because, you know, being the Patriot guy, he does have a bit of fan backing, which is great because he has really never had fan backing or heat.
Right.
So.
Yeah, you know, one of the guys, he's kind of just outside of the whole main angle, but he's never a guy who, just his frame and his athleticism for being such a big dude.
Yeah.
He's obviously gonna have a job in the WWE as long as he wants, and it's been interesting to see how they've taken this angle, and he basically hasn't changed anything except for his opponents, and suddenly he's a face. So hey, that works. Ring of Honor is I've talked about this a few times, and I was talking about this with my wife the other day. So Ring of Honor is coming to Milwaukee in March, and the day after, WWE is also coming to Milwaukee. So we're going to make a little wrestling weekend out of that, since Milwaukee's only about an hour from here. But she was much more interested in the WWE show, because we've gone to WWE house show in the past, and she had a great time. But she correctly pointed out something that I guess I never really verbalized, which is that Ring of Honor showcases the art of professional wrestling way better in most cases than WWE. And WWE overall is a fantastic product. Their production values are much higher, and yes, they do have some amazing wrestling matches that come through from time to time. But then you compare, say, your episode of Monday Night Raw to something like Ring of Honor Final Battle, which is kind of an unfair comparison, because Final Battle is like Ring of Honor's WrestleMania type event, whereas Raw is just an episode of Raw. But I mean, if you ever get the opportunity, Riley, to watch this card on the internet or something, or legitimately purchasing it, however you want to play it, man, take the time to do it. There were some matches on this card that were just the reason I like Ring of Honor is because it reminds me the most of ECW. Not insofar as ECW had a lot of hardcore gimmickry, but they had Tajiri come in and kind of debut in America, and they had Super Crazy come in, and they just had all of these guys who had, not to mention Eddie Guerrero and Chris Jericho and Chris Benoit, these guys who early in their careers had such great technical ring work, and they were able to showcase that. And that's what Ring of Honor reminds me of the most. There were two matches on the card that I want to just briefly call out here. The Young Bucks and ACH in a 6-man tag team match versus The Addiction, which is the former TNA wrestlers Christopher Daniels and Frankie Kazarian. And they were teamed with a guy named Cedric Alexander. And this match is absolutely the show stealer. There were more stand up, off your couch, go moments in this match than in most of what I've seen in WWE for the whole year. And finally, Jay Briscoe versus Adam Cole. You don't see too many hardcore style matches these days, but this one saw Adam Cole use a staple gun on Jay Briscoe's forehead. We saw Adam Cole, who's a kind of pretty boy baby, or pretty boy type of heel, get some blood as well. We saw sack full of thumbtacks, chairs, tables, ladders, the whole nine, and it really reminded me of with some hardcore elements obviously thrown in, but the sort of all-out bloody war that fans in the 70s and 80s would have seen between Dusty Rhodes and Magnum TA and Ric Flair, and guys where it was just more of a long stretched out fight as opposed to kind of an acrobatic type performance. So again, Riley, if you get the chance, Ring of Honor Final Battle this year was just outstanding. Just a few great matches on that card, and again really showcases the art of professional wrestling.
Yeah,
so just fantastic stuff.
Yeah, I've sporadically watched just random Ring of Honor matches, and I've always liked what I've seen. I think they always have done a great job, and they're good at recruiting, really, really top talents there.
Yeah.
So yeah, I've never really just sat down and watched a whole pay-per-view, but I've definitely just watched individual matches, and I'm always impressed. So.
Well, I know you've got a full schedule of watching MMA to go along with your other activities, but if
I do watch a lot.
if you can work it in, you will not be sorry, my friend. All right, that's going to bring us to the end of this episode of the Combat Press Midweek Report. Again, go to combatpress.com for all the latest news, information, opinions, interviews, video content, previews, recaps, all of that, everything that you could ever want involving the world of mixed martial arts. You can follow Combat Press on Twitter at Combat Press. You can follow me on Twitter at Reinert Eric. Riley doesn't have it called up right now, but you can follow him on Twitter at Big Riles MMA. That's BIGRILES MMA. Riley, how are we on the path to 1 million followers?
We're very oh wow, I lost 3 followers in the last day. Still way off. 999,743.
Slowly but surely, inching our way. Well, now inching our way further from 1 million. So help us get back to closer to 1 million followers for Riley Kontek. Follow him at Big Riles MMA. Follow me at Reinert Eric. Follow Combat Press at Combat Press. Go to Facebook. Give Combat Press a like for all the latest in your Facebook feed. That's going to do it. For Riley Kontek, my name is Eric Reinert. Thank you so much for tuning in, and enjoy the fights this weekend.